talk about Stave 4 of A Christmas Carol. You've already read Staves 1 through 3. And in Stave 4, we pick up with Scrooge, who's been left by the ghost of Christmas Present, and he is quite shaken after what he saw from the spirit, the ghost of Christmas Present. The two children, ignorance and want, really shook him and what he saw. And so he's in that state when this spirit shows up. And it's shrouded in black, has a hood on. The best way to describe it, it looks like the Grim Reaper, without the the giant scythe or the big tool he uses to to cut wheat, so to speak. So it looks kind of like that. Scrooge is terrified because the spirit doesn't speak to him, never really talks to him, only will point, where they need to go. And so Scrooge is not sure what to do. He does tell the spirit, "Look, I've learned a lot here. I'm sure you're supposed to teach me something. You're going to show me things that are going to happen, right?" And the spirit, the only acknowledgement the spirit gives is he kind of nods his head, and that's it. That's all Scrooge ever will get from this spirit. The first place that Scrooge is taken is into the city, to the exchange, where he does all of his business. And the spirit points to this group of men who were having a conversation about this guy who died, right? And they ask, when he died, and what's he going to do with his money? And so these are all businessmen. Scrooge has no idea who they're talking about. The men are very flippant about the whole thing, meaning they're joking about serious things. They say they won't go unless they're fed lunch. And no one's going to show up anyway, so why don't we just get together? But I'm not going to go unless I get lunch out of it. So it's kind of wild, right? And Scrooge is not sure what to get out of that. He thinks, oh, these guys are pretty callous. I can't believe they feel this way. And so he kind of looks at the spirit for an explanation, like, what do I do? What does this mean for me? And so the spirit points to another group of two men who are talking, men that he knew in business, and wanted to make sure he was very well, high up in their esteem. And they're talking, and one of the guys says, "Well, it looks like Old Scratch has finally got his last day. I mean, the devil has finally gotten this guy." And they're like, it's a short conversation, and it doesn't really help Scrooge at all. All we know is just how these men feel about this particular person who's passed away. Later on, what happens is Scrooge is taken to a real seedy part of town. It's really, really disturbing. It's a part that he'd never gone before. He would never go because it's so disgusting. The way he describes it in that paragraph is pretty incredible. For Dickens, he says that I'm trying to read it here. They left the busy scene and went into an obscure part of the town where Scrooge had never penetrated before, although he recognized its situation and its bad repute. The ways were foul and narrow, the shops and houses wretched, and he talked about how it smelled of dirt and filth and misery. It's just not a very good place in town. And so here you have Scrooge, and he goes in this beetling shop, which is like a pawn shop. And there's this old man, 70-year-old man, sitting there in this just filthy place, and he's he makes his money off basically of buying goods and then reselling it, and he'll take anything stolen. He doesn't care if it's stolen or not. And these three people show up at the same time, and there's the charwoman, the laundress, and the undertaker's man. The undertaker's man is like the assistant to the undertaker who deals with the dead bodies. Undertaker's men are well known for being very seedy, sketchy. They'll steal off a dead body, take the actual gold out of people's mouths, and not think twice about it. So they all come there because they've stolen goods from a dead man, and they're very flippant. They're very even joking about this guy who's dead, to the point that it's actually very disturbing. They take things from him, his possessions, and they keep saying, well, if he was more natural in his lifetime, he'd have somebody to look after him when he was struck with death, as I believe the charwoman says, or the laundress, I can't remember. So here they are. bartering his goods. And old Joe, the older gentleman, he's marking up on the board how much he's going to give them for their stuff. Everything from, you know, sugar tongs and a pencil case to probably the worst thing. One of the worst things is the charwoman took all of the, or the laundress took, the charwoman mainly had clothing, but the laundress actually took the bed curtains off of the bed with the body lying there. And not only that, she actually took the good shirt they were going to bury him in off of his body and selling it. It's almost as if they were trying to sell the corpse itself. It was so bad, it says in the story. And so, let me look here. They're just laughing about it, and you know, Scrooge is just taken aback by this. In fact, he says, I see, the case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. And then he says, merciful heaven, what is this? And at that point, the spirit has changed almost imperceptibly to a room where Scrooge is standing right next to a bed, and it's the bed that they took everything from. Here's the dead body laying under a shroud, right? And the spirit is pointing at the head of the body, saying, pull back the sheet, the cover on him. And Scrooge won't do it. I mean, it's very easy to just kind of pull it back and see. Part of it, I think, two things. I think, number one, it's a dead body, and he doesn't want to look at it. And number two, at this point, he starts to think that maybe, hey, this could be me in here. And that's really scary for Scrooge. He's extremely upset about that. And the spirit keeps pointing, and Scrooge says, I understand what you're saying. Please, let me see some tenderness associated with the death. Well, he says, actually, let me see some emotion about this man's death. Well, the spirit says, okay. Well, he doesn't say that. He just kind of raises his arm up, you know, and they go to a different scene. And in that scene, you have a couple who are, the woman is waiting for, obviously, for the man to come home, and they talk about the situation. They ask, you know, is it good or bad? Because these people owe debt to this man in the bed. And apparently this guy was pretty ruthless. And if you remember in those days, if you had debt and you couldn't pay it, they would send you to debtor's prison, just like Charles Dickens' father was. And so they said, well, it's not so bad. It's bad because, guess what? The guy's dead. But it's good for us because he's dead. That's really creepy, right? I mean, it's really, but at the same time, it's real. This guy was such a merciless creditor that he would have thrown him in jail, no questions asked. Because he'd gone to ask for a week's delay, and the servant, the charwoman, told him that, you know, that he was dying, he was sick, he couldn't come to talk to him. And so the debt will be transferred to somebody else, and so they'll have the money by that time. So they're actually happy about his death. So Scrooge says, okay, you show me some emotion, but show me some tenderness now associated with the death. Not the death of this guy, just a death. And probably in the most tender moment of the entire book, he sees tenderness. We are taken to the Cratchit home. It's not near as happy as it was when they had Christmas dinner. It's very solemn. It's very dark. The women are sewing, and Bob shows up, and he's very tired. And we find out that Tim has died. It's very sad. And Bob is shaken up. He's just quite shaken up by it, as the whole family. You have to remember, they're sewing the clothes, but they're sewing. The body is still upstairs in another room, waiting to be prepared for burial. And Bob talks about having gone to the funeral spot and how green a place it is. And he talks about Tim, you know, a kid who had every reason in the world to hate life and complain and gripe. He never did. Remember, if you go back to what he said, that he was glad that people saw him in the church, that he was a cripple, right? So he can remember what Christmas is all about. And it's just a very sad moment. And Scrooge is just completely overcome by it. He understands now exactly what has happened in his life and what the important things are. And there's a moment where Bob actually goes upstairs and sits next to the body and cries, and then comes back down, and he's a little bit happier, and he says, you know, I'm sorry. I have all of you children here. You're my family, and I love you, and we all love Tim, and we'll remember him for the rest of our lives. So Scrooge obviously is affected by that, and he thinks, well, that's all I need to see. And so it's not quite everything he needs to see. And there's even some joking in there with Peter about one day he's going to be able to get an apprenticeship, and he's actually going to start seeing girls, sort of dating them, so to speak. So it's kind of funny in there, but it's a very sad moment as well. And then Scrooge is taken to a cemetery. And in the cemetery, he is shown a grave. And Scrooge is just, he doesn't want to look at it. It's covered in snow. And he even goes forward to say, before I draw near to that stone to which you point, are these the shadows of the things that will be, or the shadows of things that may be only? So are these the things that are going to happen or that might happen? And the ghost just keeps pointing at the grave. And Scrooge says that men's courses will foreshadow certain ends to which, if persevered in, they will lead. But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it is thus with what you show me. Basically, look, sometimes things foreshadow what happens later on down the road, and that's where they're going to go. But if the courses change, then the ends will change. So if I'm doing something wrong and I see this is wrong, I shouldn't do this, and you change, then guess what? Sometimes it actually is helpful that you don't get in trouble with that. And so the spirit would not move, just kept pointing. And so Scrooge kept forward and covered. In some versions, he uncovers the snow, right? And otherwise, he sees his own name, and it doesn't matter. He sees his name. He says, am I that man who lay upon the bed? Oh, no, spirit. And he says, I am not the man I have been. Why show me this if I'm past all hope? So why are you showing me all this if there's no choice, if there's no chance for me? He falls on the ground. He says, please assure me that I may change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life. Show me. And then he goes on the famous lines, I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons they teach. Oh, that I may sponge away the writing on the stone. Hey, Molly. No, get down. Get down. Okay. But, no, Molly wants to get in here and talk about Christmas Carol. You want to talk about a Christmas Carol? What do you think about that? Huh? Do you like Charles Dickens? Oh, yes, I like it. Okay, I love you too. All right. So, Scrooge realizes that, I'm being assaulted here. He realizes that he's, he has a chance here. And so he grabs onto the hand of the spirit, and the hand tries to pull it away. And Scrooge is very strong in his entreaty, just kind of grabbing on. And then he wakes up, and he's holding on to a bedpost. So the spirit is come and gone, and that's the end of Stave 4. So it leads into Stave 5, which is the end of it. And so really leads into our the end, and our basically our climax and falling action, the denouement, as the French say. And that's where it ends up. All right, thanks.